All right, so last weekend I came upon a story that I knew that I was going to want to share with you as we begin our lesson for today. It was written by one of two men, either Randy Malik or Jim Santangelo. I don't know either of them, but both of their names were on a post that I was so grateful to have had show up on my Facebook feed last week. And so I'd like to share this story with you today. The very first Easter was not in a crowded worship space with singing and praising. On the very first Easter, the disciples were locked in their houses. They were afraid. They wanted to believe the good news they heard from the women that Jesus had risen, but it seemed too good to be true. They were living in a time of such despair and such fear. If they left their homes, their lives and the lives of their loved ones might be at risk. Could a miracle really have happened? Could life really have won out over death? Could this time of terror and fear really be coming to an end? Alone in their homes, they dared to believe that hope was possible, that the long night was over and morning had broken, that God's love was the most powerful of all, even though it didn't seem quite real yet. Eventually, they were able to leave their homes when the fear and danger had subsided. They went around celebrating and spreading the good news that Jesus was risen and love was the most powerful force on the earth. This year, we might get to experience a taste of what that first Easter was like, still in our homes, daring to believe that hope is on the horizon. Then after a while, when it is safe for all people, when it is the most loving choice, we will come out, gathering together, singing and shouting the good news that God brings life even out of death, that love always has the final say. This year, we might get the closest taste we have had yet to what that first Easter was like. So let me ask you, what does Easter taste like for you today? You know, what ingredients does your palate sense as you consider your answer? Are there hints of doubt or fear, despair or uncertainty? Are the essences of hope and faith coming through? Are you savoring the presence of possibilities and miracles? And is love, that most powerful force on the earth, is it showing up somewhere in the midst of it all? I imagine as we might all answer these questions, we could end up with quite a smorgasbord in front of us this morning. This Easter feels like none I've experienced before. Maybe it does for you as well. For me, I have found myself wanting more, asking for more than the usual story of Easter, and yet that story hasn't changed for centuries. It's not changing this year either. But what that has told me, that there could still be more, maybe not from the story, but maybe something deeper for me to learn, and not about the story, but about me, about us as humanity. And so I thought about that for a little bit, and I thought about how I could take this resurrection chapter of the Easter story and find some greater depth in it as to how we can apply it in positive and practical ways in our lives today. I mean, that's what unity in our teachings, especially those around Scripture, that's what we're all about. How can we tell the story and use it today? And I realized I wasn't sure I could do that today. Because today, I look around my world, our world, and what I see is that we're still in the tomb. We've not yet reached that day when we can safely leave our homes and gather together and celebrate the good news of the power of God's love. It didn't feel right to me to just let the calendar dictate a lesson that would be only about resurrection having occurred while we are still in this process of experiencing loss and renewal and grief and healing and death and resurrection. So what was mine to do? That became my Friday morning question a couple of days ago. And the answer that I was given was to see if we could step into the shoes of the women who found the empty tomb. Women who in that moment, they weren't exactly sure what had happened or what it meant. Women who needed time to feel into their own thoughts and questions, feelings and emotions. Time before they awakened at new levels to something at work in their lives that was so much bigger than them. And so what was it that these women may have awakened to as they gave themselves this time to contemplate the possibility of resurrection? And I think that the first awakening, and one that we can still open to ourselves today, is that Jesus was gone from them and still there with them. The different gospel stories in the Bible, they all tell of some image that appears. It appears in or around the tomb when the women, or in one story, some of the disciples entered into it. In the book of Matthew, an angel appears. In Mark, a young man clothed in white is seated in the tomb. In the book of Luke, it makes note of two men in dazzling apparel. And in John, the tomb only had linen cloths lying on the ground when some of the disciples went in first. But when they came out and Mary Magdalene went inside, there were two angels sitting where Jesus had been laid. And when she turned around to leave, it says that she saw Jesus standing, but didn't know that it was Jesus. But then he said her name out loud. And she called out in Hebrew the word that meant teacher. Now, the point in all the differing stories being, Jesus may have died a physical death, but his spirit, his essence, his energy was still very much alive and still with them. Today, we've all been given a gift. It's a gift of time. And I know none of us asked for it in terms of the catalyst for its arrival being the arrival of COVID-19. However, it remains a gift, and one that we can spend some time awakening to that sacred spirit, essence, and energy that is still with us today. And you can literally look for it as Jesus. I know many, many people who have a wonderful relationship with him today. But you can also call it whatever you wish. And maybe as you look around, you can recognize, you can see that sacred essence, that sacred energy being expressed as a medical professional or a first responder or a grocery employee or a mail carrier, or in the eyes of a neighbor or perhaps a complete and total stranger, the eyes that connect with yours in a way that you can't understand through words, but it is a truly life-giving way as your paths don't cross, but run parallel 6 feet apart on your daily walks. These experiences, if you're present to them at new depth, they're ones that might not be easy to put into words, and that's the beginning of knowing that you have gone to greater depths within. It's the beginning of knowing that something bigger is at work, even though you can't see it. It's also the beginning of exiting the tomb. For me, it felt a little bit similar as I thought about it as the experience one can have in walking a labyrinth. And one way that you can be invited to experience a labyrinth is make your way towards the center, and as you do, you release things that you feel it's time to let go of. And so in essence, certain things die away. And then when you turn around to make your exit out of the labyrinth, you have this wonderful way of accepting new awakenings, new wisdom, new guidance, new truths that come into your awareness. And so one thing that you can become aware of is something that tells you that you are exiting the tomb, and that is that life is better. Life feels better in some way. And it can be the smallest of things on the surface, but oh so powerful if you dig deeper into them. Little things, like maybe you find that you have more of an appetite, or you find yourself smiling more than once a day, or maybe just once a day, or laughing at the comics again in the paper, or you wake up and you realize that you have slept uninterrupted for the first time in weeks. Life feels better. Another sign of exiting the tomb is awakening to the knowing that the good can come from bad. However we want to apply those two labels. When we're in the midst of the bad, such as COVID-19 and all of the challenges and just the heartbreaking consequences that it has created, this is one where it can take maybe a little bit more time to take root in us. I mean, yes, it is very heartwarming, it is very hopeful, it is encouraging to hear all the stories, to see all the stories of compassion and love and stepping into service for each other. They've been taking place not only in our town right here, but literally all around the globe. But it's a little bit harder for them to take deeper root in us and in a lasting way when the next stories that we immediately see might be one coming from the medical professionals telling us what their day had been like, or the aerial photos that are flashing across our TV and computer screens where countries have been digging mass graves in order to start receiving the remains of hundreds, thousands of people who have died. We still have the gift of time. We still have the gift of that time to think back just into our own lives, our own personal lives, to a day or time that was hard. And remember once again that the grief and the pain and the sorrow and the angst, they were there, they were present, and the sun still rose the next day. And that at some point in that experience, that metaphorical stone was rolled away and we stepped back into life and we started moving forward once again. See, time that we can spend with these little memories, one by one by one by one, they give us the strength to step into the days today. And it also helps the good memories that are coming out of this current situation to strengthen as well and take that deeper root in us. Another very key point about exiting the tomb is that the time spent there is not the same for everybody. The time for each of us is simply as long as it takes for each of us. And this is where we really don't want to get too hung up on the literal story of the resurrection, because unlike the story told of Jesus, it's not always going to be as easy as in one day, out 3 days next, three days later for us today. And really, there's no rush. In fact, it's important not to rush. Because if we don't take an appropriate amount of time, then we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to get to those deeper levels of our experiences. And also the transformation and awakenings and resurrection experiences that can result. Last week, I shared a little bit from Richard Rohr from the Center for Action and Contemplation. And I'd like to offer this morning his take on our resurrection experiences today. He notes we do not need to be afraid of the depths and breadths of our own lives, of what this world offers us or asks of us. We are given permission to become intimate with our own experiences. learn from them, and allow ourselves to descend to the depths of things before we try too quickly to transcend it all in the name of some idealized purity or superiority. God hides in the depths and is not seen as long as we stay on the surface of anything. See, we're no different from Mary Magdalene or the disciples. Like them, we can't see the entire picture that's in front of us right now. We don't know. We can't know with 100% certainty what the future holds, what it's going to bring, how it's going to show up. And we need to give ourselves that permission to be with whatever we are thinking, whatever questions we are asking, whatever emotions we are feeling, everything, for as long as it takes to mine the depths of our souls. We'll rise back up to the surface, but when it's time for us to do so, and when we're ready to do so. Now, with all this being said, I don't want to completely throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to that number 3, that 3 days time in Scripture between death and resurrection. And here's what I want to offer to you to just keep handy as you go about taking your time. So I did a little bit of research on the number 3, and I found all sorts of meanings attached to it. But the one I wanted to offer today, I just thought it was perfect by its title and by how it was defined. It was called the universal meaning of the number 3. And it said the number 3 means that you are protected by the divinity and surrounded by pure, unconditional love. Above all, you are in complete harmony with yourself and with the universe. And so perhaps holding that image, feeling into that image of being surrounded by the unconditional love of Spirit, perhaps that will help ease and quicken the time that you need before moving forward. The last point that I'll offer about awakenings that occur as signs that we are beginning to exit the tomb is that we awaken to a newfound trust in dying, and then allowing that to lead us to discover God's presence in us and around us in new ways. It could very well be, trusting in our eventual physical deaths, but it can also be any number of other deaths that come into our lives. Deaths that can be described as something that we had one moment and is completely gone, is familiar no more. And today we're seeing this, perhaps personally experiencing these deaths, because they're showing up in the form of lost jobs, lost careers, lost plans for retirement, the loss of freedom of movement. For those who live alone, the loss of having a physical touch. There could also be loss of faith, loss of peace of mind, loss of self-discipline, loss of motivation. The list could go on. See, Jesus's death was a way of teaching us to trust in the dying. He took on all that he did, the pain, the suffering, and he did it in full view so that we could see it, so that we could witness it. He allowed all that he went through to change him so that it might change us. See, the change in him, well, it was his resurrection. And while his was focused on his overcoming of physical death, the deeper lesson for us is to apply it to all the ways that we can feel death in our lives. It's a lesson that shows us how not to become trapped in the tomb, to not stay stuck in the tomb, but to trust that resurrection, that awakening to new life, it is possible each and every time that we surrender into that presence in us and in this world that is larger than anything that we might face. Your greatest awakening comes when you are aware about your infinite nature. That was our quote of the week for this week. It was from Amit Ray, an Indian who is an author and someone known for his teachings on integrating meditation and yoga. And I think it's a good question to ask ourselves in this time that we've been given. Are we aware? Are you aware? Am I aware of our infinite nature? Are we aware of our infinite nature? Because the more awareness we can foster around that now, the more that we'll be able to address once the time does come to leave our homes and begin rising above and moving through all that COVID-19 has created. And this shouldn't be a big news flash that resurrection, awakening to new life, this tells us that life is not going to be the same as it once was. And right now, we don't have a whole lot of knowing how different life is going to be for us from now on. But I found some wonderful questions that we can ponder as a way of making some plans as to how we might like it to be. Tom Busamra wrote an op-ed for the Record Eagle week before last. He's a Catholic deacon here in town. For the last 34 years, he has ministered to those incarcerated in our county jail. And he's currently the president of an organization that's called Before, During, and After Incarceration. And the overriding question in his heart, as he thought about being on the other side of COVID-19, was which values will we dust off and polish after our current quarantine? And then he asked all of us several questions, some of which I'll offer to you today to consider for yourself, myself, and for humanity. Questions like, will we see that life is not all about us, that we need to be about life? Is it possible to live more compassionately connected to one another as well as to Mother Earth? Can we begin to live more simply so that others may simply live? Will employers understand that many more can work from home productively and thus reduce greenhouse gases from unnecessary commutes? Will we acknowledge that healthcare is a right and not a privilege, and demand our representatives end race and wealth disparities? What do we, as a local, state, and national communities, want to look like when we get to the other side of this crisis? These are very important questions for each of us to consider. And for me, all of them and others that he shared as well could be answered in the affirmative if we could answer yes to just one question. One question first. Do we believe that the love of God is the most powerful force on this earth? Do you believe? Do I believe that the love of God is the most powerful force on this earth? If we can answer that yes, then we will create a new world together, one that is better and one that works better for everybody. So let's use this time, this gift that we have, to find a way to contribute to doing just that, even if in just one small way. Let's let the moral of this year's Easter story continue to be: love always has the final say. From my heart to yours, I wish you all just a very happy and blessed Easter. God bless you. So now it's time to move into our offering for this morning. I continue to extend my prayers of gratitude to you for the financial support that you're offering to the ministry during this time that we're away from the campus. It's going a very long way to enable us to continue offering programs and activities and meet the financial obligations of the church that continue even while we are away from the campus. And so whether you have your offering there with you already this morning, whether it's in your heart to go online after the service is complete and give there, I just ask that you either hold it in your hand or hold it in your hearts this morning. Knowing as always that any gift given from the heart absolutely has the power to transform lives. And so grounded in that truth, I offer our offertory blessing. God is my source, and I give generously of my abundance in all forms. I live a consciousness of prosperity, and I joyfully step into the flow of giving and receiving. I believe that every moment offers a gift, one to give or one to receive. And I give thanks for the prosperity in my life and celebrate the unlimited possibilities present in every moment. And so it is. Amen.